High in the mountains, buried beneath layers of ancient ice, lay a secret that would remain hidden for over 5,000 years. A body, perfectly preserved, frozen in place since long before the pyramids of Egypt were ever built, long before writing existed, long before most of human history as we know it had even begun. When hikers stumbled upon this frozen figure in 1991, scientists assumed they'd found a tragic but simple accident. A traveler, perhaps a shepherd or a hunter, caught in a sudden storm, freezing to death alone in the mountains. Case closed, or so everyone believed. But 10 years later, a routine X-ray revealed something that changed everything. A small dark object lodged deep inside his shoulder. This wasn't a man who froze to death. This was a man who was murdered. And the investigation that followed would become one of the most extraordinary forensic mysteries in human history. A 5,000-year-old cold case, solved using science, patience, and remarkable attention to detail. This is the story of Ötzi the Iceman, and the ancient murder that took scientists over a decade to uncover. Chapter 1. A discovery in the Alps. In September of 1991, 2 German hikers were making their way through the Ötztal Alps, along the border between Austria and Italy, when they noticed something strange protruding from the melting ice. At first glance, it looked like debris, perhaps trash left behind by a careless mountaineer. But as they got closer, they realized they were looking at something else entirely. A human body, partially exposed by unusually warm temperatures that had melted away decades, and eventually centuries, of accumulated ice and snow. Authorities were called. Initial assumptions were simple. This was likely the remains of a modern mountaineer, someone who had died in a recent accident, perhaps decades earlier, and had simply been preserved by the freezing Alpine conditions. Nobody, not the hikers, not the local authorities, not even the first scientists on site, had any idea what they had truly discovered. Chapter 2. A body frozen in time. As the body was carefully removed from the ice and transported for examination, researchers quickly realized something extraordinary. This was no modern hiker. Radiocarbon dating revealed a discovery so shocking it made headlines around the entire world. This man had died over 5,000 years ago. He lived during the Copper Age, a period long before the construction of Stonehenge, long before the Great Pyramid of Giza, an era when humans were only just beginning to work with metal tools. Remarkably, the extreme cold, combined with the specific conditions of the glacier, had naturally mummified his body, preserving skin, muscle tissue, organs, and even his final meal in astonishing, unprecedented detail. Scientists named him Otzi after the Ötztal Alps where he was discovered. He instantly became one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in modern history, a genuine physical window into life 5,000 years in the past. Chapter 3. Piecing together a life. Before investigators could even consider how Otzi died, they first needed to understand who he was and how he lived. Detailed examination revealed a man likely in his mid-40s at the time of death, relatively old by Copper Age standards. His body showed signs of significant wear, arthritis in his joints, worn teeth, and evidence of past injuries that had healed over time. Tattoos, simple lines etched into his skin using charcoal, were discovered across his lower back, knees, and ankles, some of the oldest tattoos ever found on a preserved human body. Researchers believe these markings may have been connected to ancient pain relief treatments, remarkably similar in placement to modern acupuncture points. His equipment was equally revealing. Otzi carried a finely crafted copper axe, an incredibly rare and valuable object for his time, suggesting he held a position of some status or importance within his community. He also carried a bow, arrows, a dagger, and a small pouch containing tools and fire-starting materials, clear evidence of someone well-prepared and highly skilled for survival in the mountains. Everything about Otzi suggested a capable, experienced individual, which made his death all the more puzzling. Chapter 4. The original theory. For nearly a decade following his discovery, the leading theory surrounding Otzi's death remained relatively simple. Scientists initially believed he had died from exposure, perhaps caught in a sudden, unexpected snowstorm while crossing the mountains, or possibly succumbing to exhaustion during a difficult, high-altitude journey. This theory made logical sense. The Alpine environment was, and remains, incredibly dangerous, especially 5,000 years ago, without modern equipment, weather forecasting, or emergency assistance of any kind. For years, this explanation went largely unchallenged, but in the year 2001, a routine, updated X-ray scan revealed something that completely shattered this simple explanation. Chapter 5. The object in the shoulder. During a more detailed radiological examination, 10 full years after Otzi's initial discovery, researchers noticed something they had somehow missed before, a small, dense object lodged deep within his left shoulder. Further analysis confirmed the shocking truth. It was an arrowhead, made of flint, still embedded inside his body. This single discovery instantly transformed the entire investigation. This wasn't simply a man who had frozen to death in the mountains. This was a man who had been shot, with deadly precision, from behind. The arrow had struck a critical area near his shoulder blade, an area rich with major blood vessels. Researchers determined the injury likely caused severe internal bleeding, and based on the trajectory and positioning, may have resulted in death within a relatively short period of time, possibly minutes, following the injury. Suddenly, this wasn't an accidental death investigation. It had become the coldest murder investigation in human history. Chapter 6. Signs of a Desperate Struggle. Once investigators recognized clear evidence of violence, they returned to Ötzi's body with an entirely new perspective, searching carefully for additional clues. What they discovered painted a disturbing, far more complex picture. A deep defensive wound was identified on Ötzi's hand, a cut consistent with grasping or defending against a sharp blade shortly before death. This suggested Ötzi hadn't simply been shot unexpectedly from a distance. He had been involved in some form of physical confrontation, possibly a violent struggle, before or shortly after being struck by the arrow. Additional analysis revealed bruising and additional trauma, further supporting a theory far more complicated than a single isolated attack. This wasn't a random accident or a simple, solitary act of violence. Evidence increasingly suggested Otzi had been engaged in an extended, dangerous, and deeply personal confrontation shortly before his death. Chapter 7. Blood that told a story. Perhaps the most remarkable forensic breakthrough came from analyzing dried blood samples preserved on Otzi's clothing and weapons. Using advanced genetic testing, researchers identified blood from 4 different individuals found on various parts of Otzi's equipment. One blood sample, found on an arrowhead within his own quiver, matched a genetic profile completely different from Otzi's own DNA, suggesting this weapon had previously been used against, or by, someone else entirely. Blood was also discovered on his dagger, and remarkably, on his clothing, at a location on his back, consistent with carrying an injured or already deceased companion shortly before his own death. This evidence dramatically reshaped the developing narrative. Otzi wasn't simply attacked in isolation. Growing evidence suggested he may have been directly involved in a violent, potentially prolonged conflict, possibly involving multiple individuals, shortly before he was ultimately killed. Chapter 8. Reconstructing the final hours. By carefully combining forensic evidence, environmental data, and detailed analysis of Otzi's stomach contents, researchers gradually reconstructed a strikingly detailed picture of his final hours. Analysis of his last meal revealed he had eaten a substantial amount of food shortly before death, including dried meat and grains, suggesting he wasn't fleeing in sudden panic, but had access to food and time to eat in the hours leading up to his death. Pollen samples found within his digestive system, combined with detailed environmental analysis, allowed researchers to trace his movements, suggesting Otzi had traveled significantly, moving between different elevations in the days immediately preceding his death. Why would anyone kill Otzi? While we may never know the exact motive behind Otzi's death, researchers have proposed several compelling theories. One leading theory suggests robbery, or a dispute over valuable resources. Otzi's copper axe was an extraordinarily rare and valuable object for his time, potentially motivating theft or a violent confrontation over ownership or status. Another theory suggests a more personal motive, perhaps a conflict rooted in tribal disputes, personal rivalry, or even revenge, particularly given the presence of another individual's blood found on his weapons, suggesting Otzi himself may have been directly involved in violence shortly before his own death. Some researchers even speculate Otzi may have violated a specific social or tribal boundary, triggering a deadly pursuit and confrontation, though this remains largely speculative. What remains clear, however, is that Otzi's death wasn't accidental. It was deliberate and likely connected to a genuine, real conflict between real individuals over 5,000 years ago. Chapter 10. What Otzi reveals about ancient life. Beyond solving this incredible ancient mystery, Otzi's remarkably preserved body has provided scientists with an unprecedented window into Copper Age life. His clothing, crafted from various animal hides and woven grass, revealed sophisticated textile and leatherworking techniques. His tools demonstrated impressive skill in stone and metalworking. Even bacteria found within his stomach have provided researchers with valuable insights into ancient human migration patterns. Genetic analysis of Otzi's DNA has even revealed details about his likely appearance, brown eyes, dark hair, and genetic markers linking him closely to modern populations in Sardinia and Corsica, providing remarkable insight into ancient European ancestry and migration. In many ways, solving the mystery of Otzi's death became secondary to an even greater discovery, an extraordinarily detailed, scientifically verified glimpse into everyday human life, 5,000 years into our shared past. So, what really happened to Ötzi the Iceman? The evidence paints a haunting picture. A skilled, experienced traveler, caught in a violent, deeply personal conflict, high in the mountains over 5,000 years ago. Wounded, possibly after defending himself, or someone close to him, Otzi fled into the harsh Alpine wilderness, only to be tracked down, and ultimately killed, by a single, precisely aimed arrow. For over 5,000 years, his body remained frozen, silently preserving the evidence of humanity's oldest known cold case, waiting patiently to finally reveal the truth. Thanks to remarkable advances in forensic science, genetic analysis, and painstaking archaeological investigation, researchers were finally able to solve a murder that occurred long before recorded history even began. Ötzi's story reminds us of something profound. Even across thousands of years, human conflict, motive, and violence remain hauntingly familiar, echoes of a distant past, still connected directly to who we are today. If you enjoyed uncovering this incredible true story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we explore more fascinating mysteries from our ancient past every single week. Let me know in the comments, who do you think was ultimately responsible for Ötzi's death, and why? Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.